Huawei Princess Meng Wanzhou graced the Vancouver law courts with her presence last week for the resumption of her extradition hearings. Meng's lawyers amped up their strategy of defense with an argument that isn't anything we haven't heard attempted too many times to count before, and that is to simply blame Trump. It's been over 2 years since Canada's arrest of the daughter of the founder of Huawei, also the company's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou. Meng was arrested for fraud after the U.S. alleged that both Meng and Huawei misled the bank of HSBC, resulting in the possibility of violations of the U.S.'s trade sanctions against Iran. It's also been over 2 years since Communist China snatched up and detained 2 Canadian civilians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavard, just 9 days after Meng was arrested, in what many believe was a calculated form of retaliation against Canada. While our 2 Michaels suffer somewhere in a muggy cell, wondering when and if they'll ever get to see a loved one again, Princess Meng has been living a life of luxury in Vancouver, BC. Everything from being allowed to move from her $5 million mansion to her $13 million mansion that was newly renovated, also to being exempt from the COVID-19 restrictions that you and I, we the peasants alike, are ordered to follow, like when the Trudeau government approved for Meng's family to travel to visit her around the holidays, and when borders were supposedly closed. But will such lavishness soon come to an end? Will the U.S. request to have Meng sent to New York for trial be granted? And will she eventually be found guilty of the fraud she's been accused of? In Supreme Court last week, in a bid to prevent that from happening, Meng's lawyers focused strongly on the amount of influence they say former President Donald Trump had on the case. As MSN reports, Meng's lawyer, Richard Peck, said Trump had co-opted the extradition process in an attempt to leverage Miss Meng and her extradition status when he said soon after her arrest that he would certainly intervene in her case to aid his trade war with China. Peck called the remarks abhorrent and abuse of process that stained the Canadian justice system and the proceedings against Meng. In turn, Canadian government's lawyers, which are representing U.S. interests in the extradition case, say that the argument is moot because Trump is no longer a president and no intervention took place. Isabel Sherman, who is another one of Meng's lawyers, argued that the situation was not moot just because Trump was no longer president, stating that the damage was done the day the words were uttered. This issue can never be moot. Meng's lawyers also argued that HSBC bankers fully knew that Huawei controlled the accounts of the affiliates through which it did business in Iran, undermining U.S. claims that Meng defrauded the bank by allegedly lying about the relationships. Robert Frater, one of Canada's government lawyers on the case, said these arguments should be made at a trial, not at an extradition hearing. Meng's extradition hearings are expected to continue through to May, with the possibility of appeals further extending that process. It could be years before we find out the outcome for Meng and what type of stain the world's largest telecommunication company, Huawei, may wear after it. That is, in addition to already being designated a national security threat, which quite alarmingly doesn't appear to be too big of a concern to some people like Aaron O'Toole, leader of the federal Conservatives, who, out of all the people he could have hired, just recently hired Jake Enright, the former Canada vice president for Huawei, to run the most important department of the Conservative Party. You can catch that full story by Ezra Levant at rebelnews.com. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter so that you don't lose touch with us, and also so that you don't miss our next report on Meng. Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. We still don't have our two Michaels back, and yet we entertain Huawei and give their princess special liberties that Canadians who are not even on bail don't even get. If you want to tell Canada's government, as well as Communist China, exactly what you think about that, please sign our petition at banhuawei.com and we'll deliver it right to the Canadian government for you.